Hey guys, my name is Nick B, and let's jump into this week's futures overview. So, we know it's going to be a short week. I'm really not expecting to do too much on future side, but if we could get a decent enough of a move, we'll definitely play it. So, tomorrow we don't really have too much of red labels. I mean, Empire State Manufacturing Index at 8:30 a.m. I don't know. The open is really going to tell us everything we need to know. Then Wednesday we have core retail sales at 8:30. That might be a bit of a mover. Thursday, unemployment claims at 8:30. Friday we have preliminary consumer sentiment. Okay, so these aren't too crazy of volatility moves from what I've experienced, but definitely should help us maybe catch a general idea of where we're going to go. So let's get out of here and let's pull up the TOS, share that with you guys. Okay, so we're gonna wipe everything and start from scratch. Let me maximize this. Let's pull it up on the 2-year daily. Let's clear this and start from scratch. Okay, so what do we know? Maybe 3-year daily. I want to be able to see that 4808 previous high. Yeah, right here. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and plot the all-time highs at 48.41. We know that. This previous all-time high, I mean, as long as we can remain above it or be above it, we understand that it doesn't do us any more justice. I mean, kind of the last week was kind of an example of why, because even though we kind of remained above 4,800, we had a slight dip down below it quite a few times, and overall price kind of turned out to be a chop range. We're going to get a better look at that on the smaller time frame. So I'm not going to highlight this as the yellow trend line that I mean a support resistance level that I usually do, because this no longer can really help us dictate whether we're going to go higher or not. I believe it's 48, 41.50 that's going to help us dictate that, or ultimately if we end up coming down to 46.30, that's the ultimate baseline floor kind of that we're really in between. Because if you look at this move here from when we rolled over back in, when was this, December? Yeah, yeah, December of 2023, when we rolled over this gap here. Some people say it's not really an important gap fill. Others just might be thinking, well, we gotta close this gap. So I do think this gap is going to close eventually at some point when we have a correction. Might be this year. So before I go ahead and say that's going to be kind of the downside target, we just have to at least point out that this could be one of the bottom floors for support. So I'm going to go ahead and change this here to yellow. We'll adjust it as we break it down to the lower time frames, and then this level right here. I'm not really going to span out too far, but again, to reiterate some of the targets to the downside, at least if and when we do get to 46.30, if this happens, it would be, the first one would be 45.65 right here, and that would be based on this previous lower high. But ultimately, I think aggressively, I mentioned that I would be targeting 4,500 on a decent correctional pullback. We kind of need it, with how elevated we were. We are currently, actually. Um, at the same time, though, it's very possible that we break 48, 41.50 and kind of make a little bit of new higher highs. We'll see what we get right now. So I'm going to leave these up. Let's break this down to the 4 hour, get a better idea of what's going on with the current price action here. Oops. Okay, so this is chop. This is clearly chop. Any, there's no point in touching really anything from this range here, 47.70 to 48.41. And the reason I say this a little bit, I think we have to apply that a little bit more strictly now in the coming weeks, is because, you know, we're not really getting any real direction between those levels. I'll show you what I mean. But on the intraday, yes, there's going to be some setups we could definitely scalp, but really, you're either going higher on a break of 48, 41.50, which is a decent kind of safer side of the move, or you're going to break down 47.70 and then target that 47.40 level, which we'll pull up in a second. At or below. Oh, what did I do? My bad. Oh, this is 46.30. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll make an alert at 46.30, but we're going to identify at least a breakdown support over here. And the first one, at least on the 4 hour, what I see is really 47.70. I mean, as I mentioned on the daily, below 47.70, you have the floor of 47, really 47.10. 47.40 doesn't even apply to us anymore over here. Ever since we broke below here, came back, retested it once, and then the second time we broke back above 47.40, I think that kind of invalidates any relying source that we had on that level. So, hmm, do I want to mess this chart up right now? Let me see. Well, let me check the 1 hour. And if we can see that the clear levels to the downside are 47.70, we'll go ahead and plot that. So 47.43 we still have up there. And yeah, 4770 does apply because, I know I'm looking over here, but really I'm looking over here. Keep in mind that at least when I do my price action analysis, I like to focus on the more current recent price action. So I understand that we might have made higher lows here and higher highs here and lower highs here as well, but the trend kind of flipped around two times right here to the downside when we started to make lower lows and lower highs to the downside until we kind of bottomed out here, and now we made a new higher high right here actually, and then a higher low. So we got to focus on what we have going on here. And because the higher low, the candle closed twice above 4770, I feel as though that would be a fair support where we can trust this breakdown to the downside and ride out the move lower down to 4740, possibly even 4710. So I'm going to go ahead and place my alert here on the 1 hour at 4770. And at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and place an alert there as well, because that's definitely something we would be able to play if we come around to that downside level. So I think the first alert, just so we have time to set up the signal, would be 47.45 right here at or below. Oh, hey, hey, hey. Okay, okay. We're at the futures overview. You're gonna be sponsored on YouTube too now. But yeah, we're breaking down kind of the text here, given what happened last week, kind of how we ended off in the chop zone, and it's kind of evident here the chop that we're in between. So we're kind of looking at possible setups to the downside or what triggers might give us a heads up on direction. But so far we got, I think below 4770, we can trigger a short. First target 4740. Ultimately, I think a fair target to the downside there would be 4710. But I think what might happen is we come down towards 4770 and we might end up going a little bit higher, possibly towards 4741 again. We'll have to see again. I don't want to guess. I don't want to kind of apply too many biases here. So I'm going to leave 4775 up here to see if we can ultimately come down to 4770, ride that to the downside. Or again, in terms of upside, I would say 48, 4150. That would be my alert to the upside, because anything here, we can only take a chance at riding a position to the upside in the zone here. I don't want to do that. That's kind of what it comes down to. I don't want to take a chance on riding something out. So like for example, an entry here at 48.23. Maybe this is more scalp talk. If I see that there's momentum, we could be on top of it. Yeah, an entry at 48.23 with a stop at 48.08, I would say. And you can target 48.42, but again, that's a 50-50. We don't really know exactly and for sure what could happen here, because price doesn't know what it wants to do itself. So we're aiming for 48, 41.50 break. We go long targeting 48.50 first. If we get a break of 48.50, I'd really like to look at 48.80 to 4900 as that upside all-time high target. And again, to reiterate, if we break below 47.70, I see room down to 47.40. That would be more of a guidance level. That's why I'm not going to really plot it up. But the main idea is if we can get below 47.40, we have a clear shot down to 4710, 4700. So that's kind of what we're looking at on ES. Um, Switching over to NQ now. Yeah, yes sir, yes sir. On the what? On the daily? On the daily? Oh, I see that. thank you for pointing that out. That's so awesome because I didn't even really notice that on the daily. But yeah, the 20-day comes up right on 47.70. Sheesh. Okay, so great. That just solidifies basically the price action analysis there. Perfect. Perfect. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're perma bulls. That's what it is. I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. Yep. 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 Literally, exactly. 3 years later. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Perfect. Yep. Yep. Exactly. No, that's perfect because if we don't send out a signal this week, that's okay. Cash is a position too. And I'd like to fight a little more fiercely this year on preserving the capital gains. So we don't need to force anything. But going back to NQ, I have 3 year the 3 year daily chart here, and as always, I just like to point out that previous high. I think it's super interesting that we were able to retake that the following day, I believe, and end up end up where we are now. So let me start off by just plotting it. Let's do that. 47.76. Let me just adjust it. And similar to how I had 48.08, I'm not going to mark this off in yellow again. I'm going to leave it as a red SNR because we can't quite rely on it anymore. I mean, we can get an idea if we break below it that maybe, we have room to come down to 16,300 again, and maybe we could take a stab at shorting it if it all pans out. Makes sense. But similar to ES, how 4770 is that 20-day EMA SMA on the daily. I have the 20-day EMA on the daily lining up to 17,767 as well. So I think that's going to be an important level to see if we can get a bounce off of it and then attempt to come up to all-time highs again, just a little bit more before we sell back down, or can we breach below that 767.50 level and pave way to come down to really 16,300? Below that, I mean, you have this little bit of a gap to fill, but I target the previous higher highs of 16,070, this area right here. So I'm going to go ahead and map that off as well right here. This isn't quite the channel I'm looking for. I'm definitely going to plot these all-time highs at 17,165. Let's see. Previously, I did use the all-time highs in these areas here for 16,450 as a bit of a guidance on a support. I think that's going to be the level I want to plot right here as a support as well, because if you trace along, it has some history over here previously, but at the same time, we have some history here as well. When we managed to stay above it, it gave us enough juice to keep going higher towards the previous all-time highs. And at the same time, again, it's interesting. We came down off of the all-time high specifically to just retest that area, bounce off of it. We were able to retake 767, and as long as we hold above it, we should see all-time highs. And if we don't, again, that'll give us room to come down towards 16,450. I want to say first, below 16,450, we can look at even 16,250, below 16,250. Ultimately, I would say 1670 area. I believe that was what one of your targets was, Carlos, on NQ to the downside if we have a heavy correction or a nice little pullback. Yep. 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 I agree there. I agree. So, again, just like on ES 4630, I understand that is a bit far out right now to look at or consider. Similarly, 16,070 and really 16, no, that's not too far to consider, but 450 is also a bit far, so I'm gonna narrow it down for the levels between 16,767 and 17,165 because we are still on the daily, but at least we've identified a few floors. First floor from 165 down to 767, then second floor from 767 down to 450, third floor from 450 down to, I would say, 1670. So let's break this down to the 4 hour now. Okay, so again, I want to focus on kind of the more recent price action. And again, I don't need to, at the same time as I'm looking at this, we don't really need to break this down even more because it's kind of evident that this is just chop. You're not going to get any real concise moves with at least any real direction until we get a breakdown of 16,400, 16,3, whatever this low was right here at 328, I believe, or let me line it up, 334. So if we get a break of 334, okay, yes, that's going to be more of a directional move, I think. But as long as we're in between here, we got to keep asking ourselves before we decide to place a trade. Well, at least that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask myself, is it worth it? Do you really want to risk it here? Because again, as long as we're between these channels, there's no real direction. Price can just reverse and flip flop around. So let's see how we do into tomorrow's open. Can we come down to 767? And bounce off of that area. If we do, maybe we can catch that ride up. Let me see also on the 1 hour what we look like. Maybe I see this level here at 17,057. I know we were kind of looking at that last week. Maybe if we can get a break of, 17,057 as the intraday high over here, that could mean that we do have some room to make new session highs. And the level that I see next would be really 17,120 to 17,130. So I actually don't really mind that. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my alert at 17,050 again, just so it gives us a little bit of time to get a signal ready if it's worthwhile. Let's do 17,050. Perfect. So above that, maybe we can play a quick intraday hit 50 points to the upside. That would be my target up there. A fair stop, below 1750. Again, if you're playing on the intraday, these moves come really quick. I think the fair stop would be around 17,030 because once really ultimately you get a break of 17,040, price could very well come down to 17,050. So, you're risking what? If you enter at 50, 60, you're risking 30 points to make 40 to 50 points. That's appropriate. That's fair, but we'll have to weigh it out in the moment when we come across that. But that's one scenario here. Again, to the downside, anything here in between, I just can't trust it. I can't, judging by this price action here. It's a dangerous mission to go for that. So let's see what we get into tomorrow's open. Again, short week, so maybe one play, maybe two play, maybe no play. But as always, we'll see what we get. No pressure here. Um, the radio scalps will still do that in the morning. We'll take a look at the movers, how we're looking, and we'll go from there. But other than that, let's see what we get. If we really want to break it down on the 5 minute, no, I'm not gonna do it. But if you're watching for the Discord guys, a break below 912 could give us room to come down to 97 or even possibly 867 again. But the problem with that is we'd be timing price action. Look how many times we sort of semi bounced off of that area. So let's just see what we get into tomorrow's morning, and we'll go from there. But other than that, that is all she wrote. Thanks for joining, guys, and Carlos as the special guest. Um, we'll see what we get. So cheers on that. Have a solid and great trading week, and I'll see you guys in the AM.